On today's show, is Jalen Brunson destined to follow his dad to join the Knicks now? And did the Mavs break the Jazz? We'll do that and some draft profiles and more on today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
Hey, Dallas Mavericks are NBA champions. Bang! Bang! It's good! And the Mavericks have won the game!
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
Welcome. You're locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and NBA channel manager for the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Mavs your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. But the best way to help us grow is to subscribe and comment below. Let us know. Are you concerned about Jalen Brunson going to the Knicks now after they hired his dad away? Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. It's BetOnline where the game starts. And joining me, as always, my co-host, contributor, writer at Mavs.com, the draft profile person, the One More Thing King. What you got for me, Isaac Harris?
So I had a great moment this morning. We're recording this on Sunday night, and great moment. So a few weeks ago was really the first time that, you know, decorum, the word decorum has been something like my ears has heard before. In
your vernacular.
Yeah. And so it's like, all right, then we started hearing it a lot during the playoffs. We know the whole story from it. So this morning at church, I had to do some things on stage during service, and I wore a hat.
Ooh. And not like a fancy church hat, right? Like,
No. We're not talking
and feathers and like not like that. Okay.
We're not going to the Kentucky Derby with this one. This was like just a dad hat. Now it did have like our church name on it, but I wore a hat. All right. Afterwards, an elderly gentleman, great guy, came up to me and said, "Saw you had that hat up there. I'm glad you described that it was a church hat, because you got to be keeping some decorum up there." And I was like, "Whoa, decorum!" And it's just like
bench decorum. Is there pew decorum? There's pew decorum at church, right? Just like there's bench decorum in the NBA.
And I walked away. I was like, "Yeah, yes, sir." Whatever. Moved on, and I started laughing, and I was like, "Man, this word, I haven't, I never used this word. Now it's back to back, two different settings." But I just laughed. It was good.
On today's show, we're gonna get into the Jalen Brunson news about the rumor. Ooh, love hearing that. About his deal with the Dallas Mavericks or another team, and also Rick Brunson getting hired away by the New York Knicks. I guess just getting hired in general. And then the Utah Jazz, Quin Snyder stepping down as the coach of the Jazz. We'll get into that. What does that mean for the Dallas Mavericks? And then we're going to be doing two draft profiles. We're going to have to do these multiple players in one pod this year because of the amount of time, which is a good reason because the Mavs made the Western Conference Finals. But we'll do Christian Koloko, the center from Arizona, as well as Jalen Williams, the center from Arkansas. We'll break both of those guys down. But let's start with Jalen Brunson. According to Mark Stein, the Dallas Mavericks point guard is in line to receive a contract that, quote, meets or exceeds the 4-year, $85 million deal that Fred VanVleet signed with the Toronto Raptors. Isaac, is this about what you thought, or more than you thought, or less than you thought Jalen Brunson was going to get?
About, yeah. I think it's about, I think after the playoffs, I think before the playoffs, you're looking at like 18 something. I think after the playoffs, I'm expecting something in that 22, 23 a year. I think if you start getting over, 25, I'll be surprised. But I think I'm expecting something 22, 23.
If you start to look around the NBA and say, okay, who are the guys making about this money? It's about $21.5 million a year if you just straight average it out. John Collins making 23.5. Mike Conley, 22.5. Malcolm Brogdon, 22.5. Vucevic, 22. Terry Rozier, 21.5, which is about exactly what Jalen Brunson would make in this. Gallinari, 21.5. Fred VanVleet, that we mentioned before, 21 million a year. Buddy Hield, 21 million a year. Mikal Bridges, 21 million a year. Brunson has at least played in the playoffs, showed that he's right in that range of those guys. So this number does not surprise me at all, but now this is the first time we're hearing actual numbers about it and the actual dollar sign that could be for Jalen Brunson. So we're right along the lines with that. The other news that came out about Jalen Brunson was that his dad, former NBA player and a very vocal advocate for Jalen Brunson, Rick Brunson, was hired by the New York Knicks to be an assistant coach under Tom Thibodeau. Isaac Harris. The Knicks have been linked to Jalen Brunson. They've been after Jalen Brunson. I even went on Locked On Knicks and did like a whole segment podcast about
Did you really?
Jalen Brunson. I have, yeah. Weeks ago, I went and did this. They've been talking about Jalen Brunson so much. I went on.
Well, they've had time to talk about free agency.
I went on the Knicks subreddit a little while ago, and there was somebody mentioning Brunson, and they said, can we stop just mentioning Jalen Brunson all the time on this sub? Like, even their fans are done with them talking about Jalen Brunson so much. Did this hiring of Rick Brunson concern you at all for the Mavericks' chances to re-sign him?
I mean, a very small percentage. I mean, I think anytime you have a team that's interested in a player and you hire his dad to be an assistant coach, I think you would have to at least like your ears perk up a little bit. There's a lot of connections though with Rick Brunson, Dad Brunson there going to New York.
Leon Rose too.
Leon Rose, he's been with Tibbs before on some coaching staff. So it's like you understand it. But still, I don't think it's nothing. I don't think it means JB's going to New York, but I don't think it's nothing either. I think New York knows what they're doing. It doesn't hurt. Let's just say that I don't think it hurts anything. So it like for the Knicks.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Rick Brunson worked with Tom Thibodeau in both Chicago and Minnesota as an assistant coach. Yeah. This is not something that just came out of the blue. They hired him, and it's like, oh dang, this random guy off the street got hired. So what were the Wizards doing to like hire people for Kevin Durant? Remember that? It's like I feel like they were hiring every cousin and person that was connected with Kevin Durant to try and get him there. The
Mavs just brought in a horse from Serbia, looking forward to, Jokic hasn't signed his Supermax, so they're going to have some new horses here.
They hired Jokic's chariot mechanic, like the guy that makes him chariots that he can just ride in. But also, would you want to play for the team that your dad was assistant coaching on? Like, is that a positive even? Like, just for you?
Well, I mean, it depends on your relationship, right? And
right.
I mean, I don't begin to know what JB and his relationship with his dad is, but
after that burn on TNT with the inside guys that Jalen Brunson gave his dad when he said his dad's not even a player compared to him, I don't know. Maybe Rick wouldn't want Jalen Brunson to join it.
If you do go back to some of his early NBA days a few years ago, he credits his parents a lot. He credits his dad a lot for who he is as a person, as a player. So, to be determined if it means anything.
We don't know if this means anything. I tend to believe that it doesn't necessarily, and Jalen's still going to make the best choice for him and himself. But hey, we'll see. Like we'll see if it matters at all. If he signs with the Knicks and it becomes a thing, then all of a sudden it'll become a thing, and we'll know then. But it's hard to know. It's hard to know until then about Jalen Brunson. The other big news that came out over the weekend is that Quin Snyder, the head coach of the Utah Jazz for 8 years, is stepping down and not going to be the coach anymore. It didn't seem like a firing. It didn't seem like the Jazz were like, hey, we're moving on, so you go ahead and save face and step down. Could be that. I think the Jazz would have made that decision before right now, but Quin Snyder is walking away, and Isaac Harris, can we now definitively say the Mavericks took down and sent the Utah Jazz packing and put them in shambles?
I mean, in one playoff run for the Mavs, they made the coach quit. They made another organization release a statement for their fans. So it's just
after Game 7.
It's a tough recovery for both those guys. I don't know. I mean, Quinn stepping away. I love the Woj tweet saying that the Jazz will immediately start a coaching search. Well, no joke. I mean, of course, like, duh.
They're not taking a couple months off and just see how it goes.
I'm the only question I have right now is, does this spice up the next 3 weeks before the draft? Does Donovan Mitchell do we keep getting update after update, and does he become the hot name this offseason?
So here's the thing from ESPN, Adrian Wojnarowski, he said, quote, in aftermath of Quin Snyder's departure as Utah Jazz coach, all-star guard Donovan Mitchell is described as, quote, unsettled, unnerved, and wondering what it means for the franchise's future, unquote, that Quin Snyder is now walking away. He's unsettled by it. Now, what does that mean? Donovan Mitchell is the star player for the Jazz. He's, the guy that we've been wondering, could he try to make some kind of power move and make some kind of move where he leaves Utah, goes somewhere else, even goes to the Knicks. That's been a rumor before, goes to, somewhere else. And This is so fascinating, this whole thing, because Andy Larson, a Jazz beat writer, was tweeting about this after the Woj news came out, and he said CAA, which is the agency that represents Donovan Mitchell and Adrian Wojnarowski, like represents them both. So he said like Donovan Mitchell had CAA represented Woj released a statement that he was surprised and disappointed about Quin's departure. And one of the coaching candidates that's in line for the job to get Utah's job that came out afterwards was Johnny Bryant, who's also CAA represented. And like the whole thing about Donovan Mitchell was that he wanted to have say in the coach. He wanted to have say in who they hire next. And here they are with like this whole CAA 3-tiered thing of like, hey, can we just manipulate this whole process? Quin steps down, all of a sudden there's a power vacuum. Can we fill that vacuum with all CAA basically? Like, hey, we got Donovan Mitchell, bring in the CAA guy. Woj can work this. He can do all this. Woj was the one that tweeted a couple days ago that, hey, Quin Snyder doesn't really know what he's gonna do. We'll see what happens. That like non-news story that was weird that he dropped. Now it's kind of all making a little sense over here.
I mean, we're about to see how much power Donovan Mitchell has. I think that's the real thing right now.
We'll see that. We'll see what happens with them. There's a bunch of fallout. We'll talk about that in the coming days. But coming up, we got a couple draft profiles to get into. We will talk about Christian Koloko as well as Jaylin Williams. They're two really, really interesting big men that we want to profile. So we'll do profiles on them next coming up. But before we do, let me tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline is the best place to check out the odds and lines in sports. This year's basketball championship, the NHL hockey conference finals, Major League Baseball, latest fight news, MMA, UFC, all that kind of stuff. They have live betting, esports. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. They have all kinds of finals odds. You can do the game by game. You can do the series odds. Right now, after the game 2 win, Warriors -105, Celtics -115. It is neck and neck, and you can't really get good odds on either of them right now. For game 3, the Warriors are underdogs. Celtics 3.5-point favorite in game 3 now that they're at home. So they're really just riding whoever the home team is right now. So if you want to take advantage of that, check out all of those. They also have odds. You'll like this one. To make the playoffs next year, Los Angeles Lakers. Yes, -240. No, +190. You can get that on BetOnline. Check it all out. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Thanks for making Locked On Mavs your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Incredible stuff on the draft. Rafael Barlow, Mavs draft. Richard Statement's been on our show before, giving you an in-depth look and all that stuff. Free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. All right, Isaac, we want to talk about another news story before we get into our draft profiles. This may be a longer episode. So much stuff happened this weekend. But the Mavericks assistant coach, Igor Kokoškov, is moving on to the Brooklyn Nets. He is joining Steve Nash. Steve Nash and the Brooklyn Nets had gone after Igor when he became the coach, and he decided not to join that staff, and then he joined Jason Kidd's staff. So the Mavericks now have a spot open for offensive coordinator. He had been the guy that had been running the Mavericks offense, and so now that spot is open for the Mavericks for like the fourth time in 4 years, third time in 3 years that the Mavericks offensive guy is now gone and moved on to a different job. But what were your thoughts about Igor and his departure from the Mavs?
I thought it was interesting just because we know his relationship with Luka, and I mean, obviously, I don't even want to say obviously. I mean, obviously, I was going to say obviously Luka's on board with it, but if Igor wants to go somewhere, I mean, I don't think Luka's can stop him or anything like that. I am kind of curious and just he's not taking a head coaching job somewhere, so he's just moving assistant coach to another assistant coach place. With Steve Nash, maybe there's a location thing I don't know about, or family something, or just different situation. So I mean, obviously Dragic was there in Brooklyn last year. He's not there right now, but I don't know. I thought it was interesting, though. I thought that was one of the more interesting things over the weekend.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people saying things like, oh, Cuban didn't want to pay out. How could the Mavericks let him go? That's not how this works necessarily, right? It's not always that, hey, you can just keep guys, because especially assistant coaches, they're looking for so many different things, right? Like it depends on what they want in their career. Some guys are just okay with being an assistant, or some guys just want to stick with, maybe Sean Sweeney, who's been with Jason Kidd since the very beginning of his career. Maybe he's a guy that just wants that consistency to work under a Jason Kidd, loves working with Jason Kidd, and just wants that. Igor has bounced around a little bit and has gone to different places. Maybe he wants the opportunity to work with the Kevin Durant, or maybe he got a better offer from the Nets that's like more responsibilities and things like that. Like, who knows what these guys actually all want? It's just, it can be so different, even more so than players, I think. And so that's a big deal when it comes to these assistant coaches. And so I didn't see it as necessarily a huge deal. I'm very interested to see how the Mavericks replace him and who they decide. Like, do they bring somebody up? Like, is it Dudley that steps up? Is it somebody else that becomes that, that offensive coordinator for the Mavericks? And so I'm really interested to see that, instead of like, oh, how did they let Igor go? Because I think there's ways that the Mavericks offense can get better next year for sure. So, all right. So much news, but let's get into our draft profiles. We love doing these every single year. We go over we'll give you an overview of the player. We'll give you their strengths, their weaknesses. We'll talk about the availability. Could the Mavericks actually draft them? We'll talk about the ceiling, the floor. We'll give a comp for these players. We'll talk about the role and the fit on the Mavericks. And then we'll give you why the Mavericks should take them and why they shouldn't take them at the end. So let's start with Christian Koloko, the 7-foot center from Arizona. He was a 3-year player at Arizona, is coming out as a junior. He's 22 years old at the draft. Like I said, he's 7 feet tall. He has a 7'5" wingspan, 9'5" standing reach. That wingspan, 7'5", is the second longest that they recorded at the combine. 9'5" standing reach was the third highest that they recorded at the combine. He's 221 pounds, which is a big deal. We'll talk about that in a second. The one sentence from the Ringer said he's a Cameroonian big man who emerged this year as one of college's best rim protectors and finishers, though he must get stronger to excel in the NBA. His strengths: he's a great finisher, roller. He grabbed a ton of dunks and alley-oops in college. He has good hands. He's a pretty decent offensive rebounder. I wouldn't say great offensive rebounder, but he is going to get offensive rebounds just because of the standing reach and how tall he is in the position he can get. And he has a pretty decent looking jumper on offense. Like, he hit 72% of his free throws his last year at Arizona. He hit a couple of like free throw line jumpers, and the jumper just looks pretty solid. On defense, he was the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. He was all defensive team. He's a really great shot blocker and help defense. He's also mobile. This is huge for us and for the Mavericks. Mobile, he switched on to guards a lot. He did really well in college in the drop as well. And then he's added 15 pounds since his freshman year. That's a huge thing. He's 221 pounds now. That's the big thing for him, is can he bulk up and stick with guys in the post? But he became a better post defender. And a couple of weaknesses. I mean, the weaknesses just stand out with him. Raw, he's a prospect. He only started playing basketball at age 15, so it's only been like 7 years for him that he's been actually playing real organized basketball, coming over from Cameroon. And he said himself, like, I haven't been playing basketball that long. Like, I played a couple times before that, but really when I was 15, I was when I really started. And then he kind of developed in college. So he's not like this really experienced player, even though he's a 3-year player coming out of college. He played only 200 minutes his first year, 450 minutes his second year. And then finally his junior years when he really came on strong and played like over 900 minutes in college. And so just the rawness of him and trying to figure out exactly how he'll fit in the NBA. But those are his strengths and his weaknesses.
Yeah. You said it, I was going to add there that, not really add, but build him on he's still developing, right? Like he's this 7-footer that, like you said, he started off playing soccer in Cameroon, and he's a big soccer guy. Watching, some videos of him just doing interviews and stuff with Arizona, and just, seeing some footage of him playing soccer, it's like, dude, you don't see many 7-footers that can, dribble a basketball or a soccer ball like that.
Yeah, but you know who did that is Joel Embiid and Hakeem Olajuwon, right? Like, those guys came over and had the soccer footwork skills first, and that works really well for guys on the next level. Yeah,
so, like you said, he's a 7-footer, and he plays the style of what he could be as a center is, when you start looking at NBA comps, you start looking at what he could be in the NBA. Like, what he's good at is exactly kind of what Dallas defines their bigs as. And, even it's wild because he's a good rim roller. he has good numbers with that, points per possession, Arizona, all this stuff, but he didn't really do it a ton at Arizona. Like when you look at his breakdown of offensive possessions on Synergy, post up was 29%, almost 30% of his offensive possessions were post ups.
Dang.
And now he's not going to come into the league and be a post up guy. Like Dallas is going to run freaking plays for him in the post, but we've also seen whenever you don't have touch around the basket, how it does hinder you. Rudy Gobert, if you can't do any type of like little jump hook or something like that, and like he has that, like he has touch around the basket. Koloko does. So, but pick as the roll man in a pick and roll, it was only 15%, 16% of his offensive possessions last year. He only had 63 possessions in which he was the roll man in that pick and roll. Now he was really good at it. So when you look at centers, when I'm looking at centers in this draft, that if Dallas does choose to go big at the 26th pick where they move around, if they do take a guy and they take a big, it's most likely going to be a guy who can play in the pick and roll with Luka or do the pick and roll with Jalen Brunson in the second unit or something like that. And Koloko is one of those dudes that he can play. He has the size. He can protect the paint, like you said. He can switch out on the perimeter, like you said. And he can also roll to the basket. Weaknesses, like you were saying, though, he's just not a pick and pop guy. He's not going to shoot the three. Now, you watch yet. Now, he is a clutch client, and I watched a little bit of his, anytime you watch a pre-draft workout and you're like, all right, let's go. They had him doing, pick and pops. He was shooting, pretty far out threes at the Clutch Pro Day and all of that.
Did it look like Willie Cauley-Stein's pick and pops and his threes?
It wasn't for Instagram. No, it actually was. But no, that's his thing. It's like you're not giving it to him. He doesn't really handle the ball that well. He's still raw, still developing that. But what you're asking of your center guy, what Dallas would ask from, the 5 spot is, can you set a pick and roll to the basket? Yeah. Can you do a little short roll? If you do get around the basket, can you, at least have some touch? Can you protect the paint? Can you switch? He can do all those things.
Yeah, that's basically like rim rolling center that can also defend the rim really well, defend in space. Like that's sort of his whole thing. And so coming up, let's talk about, is he going to be available for the Mavericks? And we'll talk about why the Mavs should take him and why they shouldn't take him. What are the downsides of taking a guy like Christian Koloko? And then we'll get into Jaylin Williams from Arkansas. Really, really interesting prospect that I just think has a chance to be a really, really good player in the NBA, or maybe one that doesn't make the NBA. So we'll talk about that coming up. But before we do, let me dang it. Let me go to break.
I remember my first pod.
Nailed that, right? It's the ones when we don't have a read. It's the ones when we don't have a read that really throw me out. All right, Isaac, let's get into the rest of Christian Koloko. We're talking about the big man from Arizona, his draft profile. Availability. What we do when we do availability is I'll go through Raphael's big board from Locked On NBA big board. I'll go for the Ringers big board, ESPN's big board with Jonathan Gavoni, and then the Athletic with Sam Vecini. I think those are 4 guys that I really respect when it comes to the draft. Raphael had him at 27 on his big board. The Ringer had him 28th in their latest mock. ESPN in their mock, which came right after the lottery, they had him 42nd to the Knicks. So he's got a big range here. And then the Athletic, Sam Vecini had him at 34 to OKC. So a big range for Christian Koloko, but he should be there for the Mavericks at 26 if they want to get him. The ceiling and the floor for him, I could see him as an all-defensive team player, like get to a point where he's bulked up a little bit more. He's ready to take the pounding down low, and he's just blocking everything in sight, and he can also step out. Like Robert Williams just made an all-defensive team. I could see Christian Koloko, if he hits and makes it in the NBA, I could see him on an all-defensive team. The floor for him, I could see him out of the league. Like if he just can't add enough, if he's, if the length and stuff just isn't enough, sometimes that just doesn't, the tools sometimes aren't enough for NBA players, and you have to have a little bit more. And if he doesn't have that, then I could see him out of the league.
Yeah, I just want to see how he develops. I think the shot means so much, because if you can't, shoot a little bit, if you can't do the pick and pop, if you can't be Brook Lopez, like I wrote down, I was trying to, we always do like comps and, the fun stuff of draft, scouting or whatever it is. And I put Brook Lopez if you broke his shooting hand. And because like he's not just a rim roller in the sense of, Capella or Rob Williams. Like I wrote their names down, but they're not doing jump hooks over their right shoulder either, or their left shoulder. Brook Lopez can, but Koloko can't shoot a three like Brook Lopez either. So it's kind of this in between of like, hey, you can run to the basket. He can defend the paint, but he also has some touch too in the post that he's probably not going to utilize a ton. So that's like Serge Ibaka is another name too, where like, could he be in Ibaka a little bit taller?
Yeah.
Serge Ibaka in that, like you said, he has 7'5" wingspan. The only other guy at the combine was Mark Williams, who had a longer wingspan than that. But I mean, as far as his fit in the rotation, like Dallas, if they're going to add a big, is he, I don't know if you're walking in next season saying, hey, Christian Koloko is our answer. That exit interview we did, how we needed a guy down low. We just drafted Koloko. I think he would be fun to add to the rotation as far as like a bullpen rotation to the center thing and see how he develops, because I think he is kind of raw. I think he has a high upside of, could he be a Clint Capella one day? I think he could.
Yeah, my whole why the Mavs should take him is you bet on the tools. Like you bet on all the tools that he has to translate in the NBA, a mobile rim rolling center that can defend well at the rim at a pretty elite level and then defend in space as well. But my reason why the Mavs shouldn't take him is too raw and too project-y. Like he's just too much of a project for the Mavs to wait 2, 3, 4 years for him to really become the NBA player that they want and then excel on defense. That's what they need. They need somebody to excel on defense right now. And I don't know if the Mavs want to wait on that. If they don't want to wait on that, then I wouldn't take Christian Koloko right now, right? Because I think it might take a little bit. But with any of these players, you're going to have to wait. Like even Chet Holmgren, you're going to have to wait for him to try and figure it out in the NBA probably for, at least a year or two to try and bulk up or to get in the right shape and all that. But yeah, so it's a really fascinating thing with him because if Arizona didn't use him the right way, like I was talking to Richard Mavs Draft, who was on the show last week, and he said, yeah, I don't know if Arizona used him the right way, and I don't know if Sean Miller, the coach at Arizona, was great for him. And so if that's the case and the Mavs see him and they can watch more of the film than I could and say, oh, we can use this guy in the right way and he's ready. He's got the instincts and the tools right now to be really impactful in our defense in the NBA, then, I mean, maybe they know more about that than I do at this point. But for me, he's just a little too raw.
Well, if you're big and you're great at rolling to the rim and doing the pick and roll, then you want to go play with Luka Doncic. Like you're seeing what Dwight. I mean, we've joked about free agents wanting to do that or other players in the league. But like, if you're a big in the draft class saying, I'm better than Dwight Powell, like it's like put me in that role. Give me more than 16% of my offensive possessions as the roll man in the pick and roll playing with Luka Doncic. Then I think Luka could bring the best out of him. I think my question is why they shouldn't is. Whoever they draft, if they draft somebody, I want them to be able to play in the playoffs. Like moving forward, I want them to have some type of role. And your question is, if you're going to take a big, which I feel like you should swing for wings, but if you're going to take a big, I want you to be confident that he can log some minutes off the bench for you in the playoffs. Yes. I just don't know. I don't know if I'm like really confident saying, hey, Koloko's giving me, 12 to 15 minutes off the bench in year one.
He's not giving me Brandon Clark vibes. We're like, oh, that guy can come out and play. Like right away,
Yeah, but I like him. I don't want it to seem like, hey, we're kind of like, I don't know.
Just because we ended on why the Mavs shouldn't take him, right? The reason why they should is bet on the tools, bet on all that stuff. Like if he hits, if he hits, this is the perfect center for the Mavericks, right? They want a guy that can roll to the rim really well, that can finish really well, that is flirting with a jumper and can hit some like mid-range stuff and is not going to be terrible on the free throw line. And he can also, get to a point where he's elite defensively in space and at the rim, right? Like that's the reason why. Yeah. And if you want to bet on that, then you take a guy like this. And I think he probably has that more than, Mark Williams is probably the best one. And then Chet, obviously, it's like, Chet, Mark Williams, and then Christian Koloko probably in this draft as guys that you would take that fit that profile.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there anybody else?
Jalen,
from
Memphis there.
So that's Christian Koloko. Let's get into Jaylin Williams. This is our profile of Jalen with a Y. 6'10" from Arkansas. He has a 9-foot standing reach for 6'10".
I meant Jalen Duren. By the way.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
As far as another big. Anyway.
I transitioned using Jalen's name, but yeah,
you're like Jalen. So Jalen,
There's
so many Jalen's.
There's 4 or 5 Jalen's in this draft. Jalen Williams from Arkansas, 6'10", 9-foot standing reach. He's listed at 236 pounds at the draft profile. He was listed at 245 pounds during the season. So that's interesting to look at when we talk about something later. He had a 7'1" wingspan. He's going to be 20 years old at the draft, or he's going to be 19, but he'll turn 21 on June 29th. He went to Arkansas. The one sentence I got from I think it was actually NBA.com. They had Synergy do a bunch of draft profiles for them. And the one sentence from them was, smart big man who has nice size and is making strides as a jump shooter, but did much of his best work at Arkansas, showing off his feel for the game while threading passes to teammates and drawing charges. Huge. Drawing charges is probably his biggest strength. Isaac, how many charges did he have last year at Arkansas?
54. I watched all of them yesterday.
He had 54 charges in college basketball in one season. Guess who had the most charges in the NBA last year?
I don't know, Nick. Who did?
Kevin Love and Blake Griffin had 26. Kevin Love played 74 games. He had 26 charges. Derek White played 75 games. He had 25 charges. Our guy Jalen Brunson in 79 games in the regular season had 17 charges, and that was like, what is that, top 10? Yeah, it's like 10th in the NBA last year. So this is an elite skill for Jalen Williams, is drawing charges. But other skills for him and strengths. On offense, he was all SEC. He was one of 9 players to be named first team all SEC. He's got a jumper. He at least has one. He relies on it a little bit too much. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he seems like a guy that's like a perfect release valve for like a zone or a trap in college. He's a pretty good athlete, fluid. He can dribble the ball really well. I think Raphael in his profile said he has great ball handling skills for a big man. He's a pretty good roller. He can pick and pop a little bit, but the great passing, like he can just make some. He threw a couple, like one time he got trapped on the left wing. I saw him, and he threw that Luka behind the back pass, bounce pass into the paint to a guy that was cutting. And you're just like, this is a 6'10" like center that is doing this. That you're not asking to handle the ball too much. So for him to be able to do that is just next level. On defense, he was all SEC defense. He was one of 5 players to be named that, which, by the way, I didn't realize that there was 9 players on all SEC first team, but they only do 5 players on the defensive team, and they only do 1 defensive team, and they do 3 all SEC teams. It's like 3 all SEC teams of 9 players is like all the SEC. Like, what are we doing at this point? But anyway. On defense, he's a good rim protector. He's a really, really good rebounder, and he's a mobile big that can defend in space. He's got really good timing, obviously, with the charges, and he only allowed 0.82 points per post-up possession in college, which is not incredible, but still a pretty good number. Anything else you want to add to his strengths?
I love this guy. He's one of my favorite bigs in this bottom half of the draft.
So interesting.
I would personally take him over Koloko. I think so. I watched all the charges and I couldn't help just to laugh, because I was laughing watching it, saying, "Dude, I would hate this guy if I played against him." But he's so dang smart. You said feel for the game. I was watching too much of this guy because, and I'd put in all caps his feel for the game, dude. He knows how to play basketball. I know it sounds like really dumb and cliche, but he really does. And especially when we're looking at 2 guys and like Koloko and
so
Jalen
different.
Williams,
Yeah,
it's like you could tell who's been playing basketball for so long. I also read this article to where talking about his charges, because it's like a legit thing how he draws so many charges. They said he started learning in 1st grade how to draw charges. I'm like, wow. One of the things I really liked was Eric Musselman, the Arkansas coach. He says he's their best talker on defense.
Yeah.
And, this is an Arkansas team that made a deep run in the NCAA tournament that beat Gonzaga, with Chet and those guys, and he had a big time game. If you want to see one play that would get you super hyped, see him absolutely poster Paolo. It was unbelievable. In that next round, they lost to Duke, but he put Van Carroll on a nasty poster. But he had 10.5 inch hand width at the combine. It was the second. It was one of the biggest at the combine. 7'1" wingspan. We love when guys are 6'9", 6'10", 6'11" with a bigger wingspan.
Yep.
I love his passing. I love his energy and passion. He played one day at the combine, and then he set out the next day. There's rumblings that he got a end of the first round promise of that. Didn't play again. Didn't see the floor. I think when you start looking at ceiling floor for him, I saw the no ceilings guys. They threw out a comp, and I was like, because I was trying to find what a comp. I was like, all right, he's like a center version of Brunson in a way. It's like It's like center version of Brunson, DeJuan Blair, a lesser athletic Bam because he can switch. You know, he plays some defense. But then they threw out Anderson Varejao, and I'm like, wow, oh my gosh, that's a really good one. Comp. I love that comp for him. And
the comp that he threw out himself, I was watching it on NBA.com. They had an interview with him. And I love when sometimes you listen to interviews with guys, you're like bored. You're like, not really getting a lot. When I listened to an interview with him, you could tell, like, immediately I was like, oh, he's really smart. He was a talker. Leadership. He felt like responsibility to those guys at Arkansas. He really wanted to step up as a leader that year. You could tell in like all the clips that they were playing. And his comp for himself was Al Horford. He said Al Horford is, who I compare myself to. He said humbly, I'll compare myself to Al Horford, which I appreciated. But you can kind of see that, like a dynamic guy. And I would compare him to old Al Horford, not young Al Horford, because he doesn't have the athleticism of like a younger Al Horford. But old Al Horford now, the way that he plays, I could see that. The passing, he can rim protect, and it kind of throws you off. You're like, oh, how can that guy rim protect when it doesn't look like he has either the tools or the size to get there? He still does it because he's just really smart. But a couple weaknesses. I didn't really get into that earlier, but he said himself on that interview is that I'm not the most athletic person. He was asked what's fair criticism. And
that's Brunson?
Did he say that? I know, right? He lacks elite length and lateral quickness that's going to limit him defensively. And then he settles for jumpers a ton. And he has got really inconsistent shooting touch. Like the shooting and the jumper is there. Like you can see it in his makes. You're like, okay, that guy can hit jumpers and can hit three-point shot, but he only shot 24% from three his sophomore year, which is his last year. He's only 2 years at Arkansas. And so that I think that's a huge weakness. It's the athleticism and that jumper. If both of those were like elite, he would be probably I don't know.
He'd be higher at the draft.
Maybe like top 5 prospect because he just has so much else in his game.
And he's not the biggest like lob threat in the world. I mean, definitely catch a lob, but it's not like, Koloko with a 7'5" wingspan that catching lobs. And I think if skipping, down to why Dallas does not draft him, why a team doesn't draft him there in the late first round or something. It's you looking at it saying, I feel like some of our listeners might be saying, all right, so you said Koloko's really good at catching lobs, at protecting the paint, and doing like these 3 to 4 things that are like really good. But why do you love Jaylin Williams so much? And like this is where eye test comes into it too. Of like when you watch this dude, he just makes the right plays. He knows how to play basketball. And it's like I think so why not? Is because what's his elite skill? And it's like, all right, well, he's not like protecting the paint. He's not elite at this, but he's dang good at everything. And that's the thing. And he talks, he seems like the best teammate. And so, and my question a while ago is like, can this guy play in a playoff series? Yes. I think he can play day one in the playoffs right now. And I love this guy. He's one of my favorite. If we had to rank some guys there in this range, then we're going to do plenty more profiles. But when it comes to bigs, if Dallas goes the big route, I would be thrilled if Jaylin Williams is a Mav.
Why the Mavs should take him and shouldn't take him, kind of the same as Isaac's, but the Mavericks should take Jalen Williams if they're betting on the skill and intelligence and the jumper to be real and to find a really unique big man that can play in the playoffs right now, which is exactly what you said. And we don't talk about this stuff before we get on. So yeah, he could play in the playoffs right now. Like you could see that stuff translate. Why they wouldn't though? It's kind of all the things you said. He's too slow to be a mobile big man. He's too small to be a defensive big, and he's too inconsistent at shooting to be a stretch big. So like, okay, what box does he fit in? He has to try to like make his own box where he's like a Al Horford, Draymond type on offense. And then defensively, he's sort of like a, I don't know if we have many guys like this in the NBA, but yeah, it's those things. Too small to be
angles defensively.
Yes,
unbelievable.
That's the
Chargers.
I was
just nerding out and watching like his angles and being able to read passes and steals and the Chargers thing. Like it's funny, like watching him, like, dude, this would be so annoying. But like, there's people breaking down his game, legit saying like this is part of his rim protection because it throws guys off so much because he's so good at taking charges that it's like, oh, do I go up? Because he's going to take the charge, but he's also 6'10". And he can protect the rim some too. So it's just, he's a brilliant player. High IQ. Love it.
Incredible. So that's Jalen Williams from Arkansas. There's another Jalen Williams. There's a bunch of other draft profiles we'll do as we go on. Guys, thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs.
Peace out.
Boom.